Hi, this is Joseph Mallozzi, co-creator and showrunner of Dark Matter, and you're watching Mr. Media.
I'm Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You can see, hear, and read more than 1,000 of my previous celebrity interviews at mrmedia.com. That's mrmedia.com. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Apple News, Google Play, or Stitcher, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. On today's show, I'll talk to Joseph Mallozzi, co-creator of the graphic novel and TV series Dark Matter, until recently seen on the Sci-Fi Cable channel. The show's surprise cancellation after 3 seasons caused a social media uproar and almost helped it find a 4th. Almost. We'll talk about all of that with Joe and where the crew of the Raza might go from here. Stick around. Hashtag Rock the Raza didn't do it. Neither did my favorite, hashtag Boobs and Blasters. The truth is, after weeks of an intense Blink Drive-driven campaign by Raza-loving science fiction TV fans and the show's devoted cast and showrunner, executive producer, and co-creators, nothing at this moment seems likely to bring Dark Matter, the best science fiction show on TV, back for a 4th season. My wife and I first discovered the show, which initially viewed like a delightful amalgam of Star Trek, Star Wars, and everything else we'd ever seen in space, on Netflix. But while the tropes were familiar, the premise of 6 strangers waking up from amnesia aboard a ship was anything but retread. From the characters' names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, so named based on the order in which they awakened on the ship, Dark Matter was fresh and exciting every week for 3 seasons. The series starred Melissa O'Neill, Anthony Lemke, Alex Malari Jr., and Jodelle Ferland, with Roger Cross and Zoe Palmer as Android. It was executive produced by Jay Firestone, Mr. Mallozzi right here, and Muley. Joining me today is Joe Mallozzi, co-creator with Paul Muley, whose name I just gave without his first name. I just realized that. Is it Paul Mully or Paul Muley?
It's Paul Mully.
Paul Mully. Paul, I'm very sorry.
But everybody says Muley, so I'm sure he's used to it by now.
I was saying your last name wrong until you actually got on Skype with me. So, these things happen. So these guys were co-creators of the graphic novel on which Dark Matter was based. Joe helped fans and the cast of the Raza, the home ship of the show, to mount a major effort to convince Netflix or somebody to produce a 4th season. And Joe Mallozzi, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. I wish it was better news, but Joe, say it ain't so. Tell us there's some hope here.
Yeah, sadly, I would say we've exhausted all avenues to, in attempting to secure a 4th season and a miniseries. I'm going to say for now, because who knows? Someone this morning sent me an article that was published back, I think, in 2005 about the cancellation of Farscape, and the parallels are eerie. But in any case, that was an instant where the fans rallied, and they ended up getting a movie or 2-hour movie or miniseries to the Peacekeeper Wars to cap off the show and get some sort of closure, which was kind of nice. So who knows? At present, I'm going to say, unfortunately, we didn't find a home for the show, sadly. But stranger things have happened. Stranger, wonderful things have happened.
I want to come back in a few minutes and talk about what's happened the last couple of weeks from the last episode airing through the blog post that you made that seemed to make it pretty final. But before that, let's go back a little bit. For people who may have just discovered through Twitter, through this incredible Twitter campaign, that there was something called Dark Matter. I tried to explain it a little bit. Maybe you'd have a better way of describing what the show and the story is about.
I'm terrible at pitching, but in a nutshell, it's about, as you said, 6 individuals who wake up on a ship with no memory of who they are, how they got on board. By the end of the first episode, they find out that they're mercenaries and murderers, the worst of the worst. And really, the show is about redemption. Are you born bad? Are you a product of your environment? And we sort of follow these characters on their journeys to sort of start new lives. But of course, the past will always come back to haunt their former victims, their former rivals, the law. People will always come after them, and because they no longer have their memories, they'll never see them coming. And sort of that's, in a nutshell, what the show is about. But ultimately, it's really about the characters. I mean, I spent 12 years working on Stargate, SG-1, Atlantis, and Universe, and beyond all the amazing visual effects and the stories, it was really about the SG-1 team, the Atlantis expedition, the crew of the Destiny, in much the same way in Dark Matter. It's about this family unit. And, I've always been a big sci-fi fan. And so in your introduction to the show, you talk about tropes. And, that's something that I really wanted to embrace and kind of, in a way, undermine. When we first introduce the characters, they are tropes. And that's one of the first things that criticisms we receive from the show is the fact that, hey, these characters are tropes. There's a gunslinger who's like Jane from Firefly, and there's the kid, the tech kid, and there's the android. And then over the course of the show, because they're blank slate ciphers, they necessarily are, in essence, kind of tropes. And as the series progresses, you peel the onion on their characters, and you find out that there's a lot more, and you kind of upend expectations. Like the character of 3, played by Anthony Lemke, was almost universally reviled after that first episode. And by the end of the series, season 3 was one of the fan favorites. So that was always kind of something we set out to do, not just in terms of characters, but also in terms of stories. We did a time loop episode this season. I knew I wanted to do a time loop episode, so I ended up studying 24 time loop episodes from various productions to sort of distill it down to its essence and sort of get the formula, but kind of upend it and make it ours. And it turned out to be a fan favorite. We did a time travel episode where the crew ends up going undercover as a suburban family in
That was great. Yes.
Just it's at the end of the day, it had its parallels to Stargate, certainly tonally, which is something also I set out to do. I think humor goes a long way towards allowing the audience to connect with the characters, and I think all the characters were humorous in different ways. And so, at the end of the day, it was kind of surprising and ultimately very disappointing that we didn't get a 4th season. But here we are.
It was. I remember when we watched and that was we didn't know it was on Sci-Fi for the first season. My wife loves science fiction TV shows, and she wanted to find some more that maybe we hadn't seen. And we happened on this. It's Dark Matter. What the hell is Dark Matter? So we started watching it. And at first we were like, wow, that seems a little like, as I said, it's Star Trek, Star Wars. You mentioned Stargate and Farscape and other things. And the thing was, yeah, it was. There were definitely things in that first season that made you go, oh, but that reminds me of, and then, but it was so, it has this great sense of humor about it. The characters, especially as you go further into the series, they're so well drawn. I would just really enjoy it. We look forward to it each week. I don't want this to turn into a funeral service, because I'm hoping there'll be more. But I really love the show.
Thank you.
How did the TV show? It was conceived as a graphic novel by you and Paul, right?
In fact, it was not. It was.
Oh.
I wrote. I had the idea for the show. I was working on Stargate Atlantis, and I thought, eventually I'll go out and pitch it eventually when the series ends, or my time on Stargate ends. And of course, we kept on getting picked up, and that allowed me to really flesh out the backstories and flesh out the arcs. So one of the things I was very proud of with Dark Matter is it wasn't a show we were making up as we went along. We didn't just sit down and say, well, what are we going to do this season? Every season I knew the arcs I wanted to follow, the big reveals, and we kind of worked to that every year. In any case, I wrote the pilot script, and then my longtime writing partner Paul did a pass on it, and we essentially developed it. And I got my start in development as a manager of animation development, and just from experience, I know that selling original ideas are very tough. It's just a tough go. But everybody likes IPs, established properties. So that's what we decided to do. I approached Dark Horse Comics about turning it into a 4-issue comic book. So those first 2 episodes became the first 4 issues of the Dark Matter comic book that were gathered into a trade paperback that were subsequently used to pitch the show and sell the show, so that we could eventually go back and write those 2 scripts based on the comic book, based on the first script.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, see, I mean, everything that I had read indicated that it came from, but that didn't go far enough back, obviously.
Right.
And that makes a lot more sense to me. One of the things I've noticed is, like I've had a lot of people on the show who have written novels, like Mark Guggenheim, for example, who is the showrunner for Arrow and Legends, DC Legends. And now he wrote a novel called Overwatch. And the thing about that, and other people like that, is that they write a much better fiction, a novel that they move faster because they're used to the pacing, the TV pacing. So it's interesting to me to find that you conceived it first for TV, and then actually wound up doing it as the graphic. Am I getting it wrong again?
No. Actually, you're absolutely right. It's interesting you talk about Mark. Now, did he get a start in comic books?
Well, no, he got his start in TV. I think he did.
Yeah.
Did he do The Practice, or he did Boston Public? He may have done both of those. And then I think he started doing comics side by side.
I see. Okay.
And he's certainly been delighted to use, since he's been working on Arrow, he's gone back and done comics again, and he's developed a couple of his own properties. He's been on a couple times.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that he did TV before he did comics.
Okay. Now, it's interesting when you talk about sort of his experience, because one of the tips I always give writers looking to break into the business is instead of, just writing the scripts and going out there and, hustling, which you can certainly do, think about approaching animation companies. Because that's how I got my start, actually. I approached an animation company. They tend to be more receptive to new writers. You hone your craft, you get paid. And one of the big perks is that writing for animation forces you to think visually, in visual terms. And I think that's helped me a lot in my writing, many years later, just having that animation experience.
Well, to me, the pacing of some of this stuff, it's so different with someone who has had to condense and be concise for television or film even. So yeah, that's why I thought of it. Well, it's very interesting, and I'm glad to get the record set straight on that. I'm sure, had there been another season without this interruption that we're dealing with now, and that there'd be more print, there'd be more explanation, there'd be more press about the show, and maybe I would have known that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's something that people ask about all the time, which is it's not really a secret, but I guess not as well known.
No, yeah, I think that's it. I mean, up until a month or so ago, for me, it was we just looked forward to watching the show. I was never able to get Sci-Fi to connect anyone from the show with this show before. So,
really?
Oh, they've been awful ever since the first couple of seasons of Eureka. They very unresponsive, I found. So
they have been awful.
Yeah.
And then we can agree. Okay.
Yeah. No, I know. I was actually, when I was going over my script for interviewing you a little while ago, and I mentioned at the top about Eureka and Warehouse 13, which had several seasons each, but we just felt like they could go on forever. And she said, "Hey, don't forget about Alphas. Remember how mad we were when they canceled Alphas after 2 seasons?" So yeah, I mean, we take that seriously. But yeah, I was just enjoying watching the show.
And I would add Farscape.
Farscape.
Farscape. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess some people would probably say that Battlestar Galactica did not stay on long enough, or or maybe some would say Stargate. I know there's always people pushing for Stargate to come back in some form.
Well, certainly, Universe only got 2 seasons, so I would agree with that. But in all 3 cases, I think we had more stories to tell. And if we would have gotten the pickup, certainly, we would have delivered more seasons.
I see. You mentioned the parallels with Farscape and Dark Matter, and I kept thinking, Star Trek was canceled. The original was canceled after 3 seasons, which turned out to have been a great crime. And here's, Dark Matter with half as many episodes, probably, if maybe even about half as many episodes, but 3 seasons. You would think that the parent company, NBC, might recognize that they have a poor track record on deciding when a sci-fi show should stay or go, and maybe they would have given this more time.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's a business decision, although to be honest with you, I can't really make sense of even the business side of the decision, just because, the ratings we were still one of the network's highest rated shows. We actually approached them when we thought, oh, maybe it's a financial decision. What can we do? Should we lower our licensing fee? And, they said thanks, but no thanks. Essentially, we, approached them about going down and pitching them what I had in mind for season 4. And they're like, it's not creative. And, whatever. I think, besides, the cancellation was very disappointing, obviously. But I think the thing that irked me was the fact that they didn't really give us any closure, or not even like a mini series to wrap things up. It was just like, we're moving on. And I guess, one of the reasons that kind of surprised me so much. Sorry. Sorry. Pardon me. The reason that kind of surprised me so much, is because they made this, this big deal about the fact that, hey, that was the past. We're sorry for past mistakes, but now it's a fan thing, and hey, we're serious about sci-fi, and then we get canceled, and disappointing.
Yeah. Well, so I was going to wait. We'll come back to what I was going to ask you about in a second, but let's go back to the end of the season. You're anticipating the season finale. You've had no indication that this is going to be the end of the show at this point, right? You haven't actually been told, or have you?
Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
Here's the thing. Sci-fi is divided into sci-fi originals and sci-fi acquisitions. Sci-fi originals is LA, and sci-fi acquisitions is New York. And we were an acquisition, meaning basically they don't pay as much for us as they do for their big original shows. And yet, we did very well, and in many cases beating out their original shows. I was always fairly confident we come back every year. And then in June, our big champion in New York, Chris Regina, left Sci-Fi, and Chris was a huge supporter of the show and a great ally, I would say. And we lost our champion in essence at the show when at the network when Chris left. And after Chris left, that's when I started to get nervous, and that's when I started to hear, oh, you guys are on the bubble. And I was like, okay, well, what can we do? And we tried various, responses or ways to sort of head off the possibility, and in the end, they were all for naught.
It reminds me, I was in the car for like 4 hours yesterday, and we listened to the new podcast by Preet Bharara, the former U.S. Attorney General for the Southern District of New York, who was fired famously by Trump several months ago. Mm. And after being told by Trump that he would get to keep his job, and he told the story of why he thinks he got let go, even after he was told he was going to keep his job. And what it boiled down to was Trump kept calling him, which was okay until Trump was, maybe you see where I'm going with this. It was okay until Trump was inaugurated, because then he wasn't officially the president, it wasn't seen as influencing. But then he kept calling him after he was inaugurated, which was considered to be inappropriate for legal reasons and other reasons. Bharara had said that in 8 years, Barack Obama had never called him. He'd never even spoken to him. And here Trump keeps calling him. And then as we find out that there were other issues, well, Bharara, the last time Trump called him, Bharara went through this thing with his staff of lawyers and said, should I call him back? Should I get an intermediary? What should I do? And ultimately they said, they told him to tell Jeff Sessions, the U.S. Attorney General, about it and say he didn't feel it was appropriate to take the call. So he never did speak to Trump again, and within a day or two, he was fired. And his feeling is that it was because he thought he was doing his job and doing the right thing for the law, that he didn't call the president back, but the reality is it could be something as simple as that. You just don't know when you let go. I guess is where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
You can't always know. Now the campaign that came up, it seemed like it bubbled up from the grassroots. Were you complicit at all in getting the fan response? Did it happen because of the
I did not take the initiative. It was about like a half dozen fans who, I mean, I've been very active online for years. I do an online blog where I've been blogging daily for 10 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
I've yet to miss a day. And, fans follow me from Stargate to Dark Matter, and these half dozen fans, I dubbed them the Dark Matter Council, were made up of like longtime blog readers, but also new fans to Dark Matter. And they emailed me and they're like, hey, we want to do something. And to be honest with you, I mean, I've always been active online, but I don't know anything about launching campaigns. And they basically reached out to, for instance, the campaign that got Longmire 2, maybe 3 seasons at Netflix, and they talked to those people, and those people were very helpful and said, this is what we do, this is what we did, and they used Twitter as a tool to sort of, get the word out. I mean, everyone's obsessed with trending now, and it's not just people, but broadcasters as well. I know they watch, they love the social media aspect, and so the Dark Council, if you will, took the bull by the horns and said, okay, look, this is how we do it, and there's a specific formula to trending, and they rally the troops, and like I said, well, I didn't take the initiative. I fully supported the fan campaign, and I retweeted them and gave them shout outs and links on my blog, and they did a fantastic job. I think that first night, like 300,000 tweets. Then we did even more the second time we did it, and then we did like an international one, and then we did a third one after we kind of announced that we ran out of options. And I mean, I don't know what they have planned now. I essentially don't want to give anyone false hope. So I said honestly, just consider maybe the show has ended. Who knows what the future holds? Maybe something may happen, maybe something won't. But at this point, I don't want to give anyone false hope. We're probably going to move on. And they reached out and said, no, we're not. We don't want to give up yet. And we've got some ideas for some other interesting ways to get the word out. And so all power to them. I love the fans. One of the reasons that I'm so annoyed at this cancellation is the fact that the fans invested their time. There's like an unwritten rule, an unspoken agreement in traditional television where the broadcaster puts a show on the air, the audience has to watch, and if they watch, they're rewarded with a second season. And our fans watched and they weren't rewarded, so they're angry, and I totally empathize with them.
So you're in an interesting position from my point of view, in that you have worked on shows that have run on Sci-Fi in the past and had this connection there, and right?
Yeah, I've done the math. I've worked for Sci-Fi for 15 years.
All right, and I'm sure quite a number of those shows have then followed up on Netflix or perhaps Amazon, where they've been available. So I don't want to put you in a position of saying anything bad about a company that might wind up employing you again. But what I am curious about is, so do you have a sense of how the show has done on Netflix? Repeats, if you will.
Netflix never shares that information. Just anecdotally, I heard we do well, and it's amazing the number of people who reach out online. I'm also active on Reddit, and people will discover the Reddit subreddit every day, and they'll come by and they'll say, oh my gosh, we just like you were saying, you and your wife, we were checking out Netflix for something to watch, and they recommended Dark Matter, and I was like, "What's that?" And they end up binging the show over the course of a weekend, and that's heartening. I love to hear that. So I think it did well, but I don't know. I can't say for certain.
Was Netflix ever a player these last couple of weeks?
I mean, we reached out to Netflix, but I mean, realistically, it's not the same as the Longmire situation. I mentioned Longmire, which was a show that I forget where it originally aired. I think it aired. Yeah, A&E, I think 2 seasons, and then it was canceled. Then it was picked up by Netflix. But the difference being was that Netflix ended up saving the show and brought it, to Netflix as kind of a new acquisition, if you will. Whereas in our case, it already existed on Netflix, and I know that they were interested, and I think they tried to run the numbers and tried to sort of find a way for it to make financial sense for them, but ultimately, it didn't, because at the end of the day, while eyeballs are important, subscribers to these streaming services are even more important. So, that was one of the main kind of motivating factors. But I mean, they did try, and Netflix has always been a fantastic supporter of the show. I have to say, Netflix, Space Channel in Canada, Sci-Fi International, not to be confused with Sci-Fi US, have been really supportive and fantastic. I mean, we got an after show in season 3, and that was really totally due to Sci-Fi International stepping up and producing it for us. So thanks to them.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was gonna say something about that. In preparing to talk to you this afternoon, I was going through a bunch of websites and stuff, and wound up on the Sci-Fi site, and I saw that there was an after show. And I said to my wife, "Did we know that there was an after show this season?" She said, "You're kidding." I said, "It somehow went right by us." No.
Well, internationally, it actually aired after each episode, whereas in the US, I think it just popped it on the Sci-Fi website.
Oh, that's why we didn't know. That's too bad. All right. So I have to ask, who controls the rights at this point?
Very good question. The original comic book rights reside with Dark Horse. Prodigy Pictures, which is the production company owned by Jay Firestone, owns the film and television rights.
Okay. And are those entities in a cooperative mood with you and Paul in terms of,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jay tried, he shook every tree in an attempt to sort of find a new home. He was relentless over these past couple of weeks, calling and going to LA and following up, and just unfortunately, it was not to be.
I know Mike Richardson at Dark Horse, and he's always been very, very open to seeing these properties exploited for TV and film and what have you. So, okay, let's go back for a second. I wanted to before we actually got to this part, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of about the main characters and the actors who play them, because they also were a very big part of this campaign the last couple of weeks. They were, I want to say all of them, most all of them were active on their Twitter accounts. They were interacting with the fans. You showed like a whole bunch of bloopers, just everything you could possibly do behind the scenes. But I wanted to go back and talk about the characters, and let's do it in order of their number. Sure. Mark Ben David was one.
Yes.
I have to ask, because I don't know all the, I haven't had like a trove of background stories to read about Dark Matter, so I've never really been clear. Was it always the plan that one would disappear from the show, or
it was not the plan that one would disappear from the show. I mean, I love Mark, and I thought he did a great job with his character, but let's call it a request. A strong request was made to shake things up, and by killing him in a shocking manner. And it was an instance where requests have come my way before, and I kind of fought them. But in that instant, it was a request that, while I didn't necessarily agree with, I was kind of not in a position to fight, and so. That was that. And, it required me to kind of shift shift a few pieces. There's, that whole Derek Moss storyline was left kind of a little unresolved, and that was something that I wanted to go back to. In fact, actually, in season 3, I had a story in mind to kind of wrap up that storyline, but Mark was unavailable, so I had to come up with an episode fast. And a couple of months earlier, I had written our time loop episode, All the Time in the World, and I'd written that episode in like 2 days. It was like the fastest episode I've ever written, because I tend to find I tend to write the funny ones faster. And so I said, okay, you know what? This has to be a funny one. So I'd been toying with the idea of the crew going back in time and ending up in 1950 and in the 1950s, and we kind of explored that, but it would be prohibitively expensive in terms of like costumes and set design. So I just decided to send them back to 2017 and do what I call a Back to the Future meets Stranger Things take. And it worked out. And if we had done a 4th season, I would have taken another run at that whole Jace Corso, Derek Moss one storyline. So that was an instant where probably the biggest curveball I was ever thrown was that. And the good that came of it was the fact that it was so shocking that fans realized, holy smokes, no one is safe. Of course, the bad thing that came out of it was losing Mark Ben David, who again I say is a fantastic actor and a good friend. I mean, whenever he's in town, we always make it a point to get together and grab a coffee or pastries. I'm big on pastries.
Oh, okay, good. Yes, I'm here. Yeah, it was interesting because the character of one was very different from all the others. I mean, all those characters are extremely different from one another. Yeah. He was very different, and yet there was, in that first season, there seemed like we might be dealing with this threesome of 1, 2, and 3 for some time. And of course, that we can get into that. But I was just curious. It just seemed like he when you lose the character whose number is 1 and you have 1 through 6, that seemed a little weird. Not that I wanted it to happen to anybody else, but yeah, I had to ask. So Melissa O'Neill as 2, who's an enhanced human, I guess we could say, or something close to that. To me, I thought, not take anything away from anyone else, but I thought she was absolutely the breakout on the show. This female character who could, in the same split second, turn you on and break your neck at the same time. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's funny you say breakout because it was her first. This was her first television role. I mean, she'd never done TV before. She actually won the first season of Canadian Idol.
Oh.
So, and she was on Broadway, and we went down and met her in New York, and we had lunch with her, and she was on the short list, but from the get-go, she, when we saw the audition tape, in my mind, I knew it was her. And, we had a great lunch, and over the course of that lunch, she ended up, winning over the other producers, and, the rest is history. She's fantastic. She's incredibly dedicated. She does a lot of her own stunts, which she's very proud of. A lot of the fighting is her. I mean, we do use obviously a stunt double for safety reasons, but a lot of the stunts and the fighting and the sword work is her.
Yeah, if I was Marvel Studios, I would snap her up for a female role just immediately. Humor, action. I mean, yeah, she's pretty remarkable. Anthony Lemke as 3, and I mentioned early on, it seemed like we were going to have a little triangle with him and Melissa and Mark. What was interesting to me, though, was that once the show kind of moved away from them having interpersonal relationship, I thought it actually got better, which surprised me. I thought losing that was, I guess we've been trained to expect, well, you're always going to have 2 characters, they're going to have to work up to sleeping with each other. But it actually got better because they seem to have this greater respect for one another, and the interplay between them. It just felt better somehow.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't want to do is set up a romantic triangle, especially with the character of 2. For her, it was just sex, and she obviously has a connection, an emotional connection to all the crew members, but for her, it was not a big deal, whereas to 1 it was, and 3 ultimately you find out maybe there was a little more. But Anthony Lemke is interesting in that apparently before Dark Matter came along, he told his agent, "I need you to get me an audition for a sci-fi series." Because I guess he was watching all his friends go to all these cons and everything. He's like, "That's what I want to do." Yeah, and he just loves kind of genre and sci-fi fans. And he auditioned for the role of 3, and I'm kind of fond of telling him after the fact that, with all the other characters, we had 2, maybe 3 choices, but in the case of 3, he was our guy. So, if basically he had played hardball, it would have been very difficult for us. But, I mentioned the fact that humor is important to the show, and one of the things I really looked for was humor in all of the auditions, because all the characters are funny in different ways. And 3 is really the more, I guess, overtly humorous character. And, Anthony loved to play the character, really embraced the characters. And I think of the entire cast, I think he was probably most upset about the cancellation. I think everybody was very upset, but he really, took it very hard.
I think you could see that in his tweets. You could see that it was very, yeah. But again, he would be the other one in the cast who I think if I was Marvel Studios, I would find a Marvel character and grab this guy and put him, whether as a Netflix series or in the movies, because he's got that mix of kind of that Harrison Ford Han Solo thing, and
exactly
the smart ass, but you can believe him with a blaster or a gun or whatever. Yeah, very good. Alex Malari Jr. as 4. Personally, I say this for myself. I think my wife would agree with me. We were a little frustrated when he got the opportunity to get his kingdom back and become the emperor, and then he turned against his shipmates. I was really hoping, and it seemed like at the end of season 3, we were coming back to him rejoining the team, which we were really excited about because he added an extra bit of spice or something there.
Yeah, I mean, Alex is fantastic. He's another guy who, like Melissa, maybe even more than Melissa, fully embraced doing his own stunts. So all that sword work, all the weapons work, the fight choreography, that was really mostly him. Again, a stunt double for safety purposes, but he was all in. And you have to remember that these characters were fundamentally, at the beginning, not very nice people or bad people or certainly troubled individuals before the mind wipe. And I knew, from the very beginning that one of the characters would have to go dark side, and I thought he would be the perfect one to go dark side. But I wanted to do it in a way, I mean, when he got his memories back, his memories of Ryoshida back, he also had the memories of 4. So essentially he was like 99% Ryo Ishida and 1% 4 or somewhere around there. And I kind of wanted to make it clear that, he's trying to do what's best for his people. And, when he turns against, if you will, the crew of the Raza, in his mind, he tried to make it work. He basically approaches 6 and says, "I need the blink drive," and 6 is like, "Forget it." He approaches 2 and says, "I need it to save my people, to end this war," and she turns him down. So he has no choice. He decides he's going to go on the ship and take it. He tells Misaki, non-lethal force. She basically ends up killing Nyx, but you could say he's indirectly responsible, but certainly that wasn't his intention going on. He just wanted the blink drive. And then he sets off the explosion to destroy EO7 that will precipitate the corporate war that will hopefully save Xiron. But before he sets off the explosion, he contacts the android and says, "Get them off the space station." He warns them. And then the next thing he knows, the Raza crew goes after his research station, destroys the research station, sending him back, many years, and steal the blink drive. Killing many of his citizens, presumably on the research station. So I mean, it was a series of I guess mistaken assumptions, if you will, and that essentially led to the takeover in episode 8, where they hack the android and he goes on board and he faces off against two And they have that talk when he basically informs them, I didn't kill Nix. And then we end up in episode 12 where he invites them to the palace and makes them the, one final offer for the blink drive. And, it comes a point where a couple of them, 5 and 3, suddenly start, reconsidering and saying, what the hell are we doing? I mean, holding on to this blink drive, half the time it doesn't even work. Just give it to him. And, and he, the episode is appropriately enough entitled My Final Gift to You, where he gives them all a secret. And 2 was essentially going, they have this discussion about what to do with him. And one of the choices is let him go, which they think is dangerous. Another one is keep him on board, which they think is equally dangerous. One of the other options that we discussed, which I'm kind of annoyed did not make the cut because it was actually removed from the cut, and I didn't realize it until after, was the option of wiping his memory, which they also discount because it's like, well, it's just he's going to be starting from scratch, and you're going to have to assume that he's going to trust us and become the 4 that we knew, and that's not a guarantee. So really, they were left with no other option, and 2 takes it upon herself to make the hard decision, as always, as the commander, and kill him. And then they end up being interrupted, and the events of episode 13 happen. And by the end of the episode, it's the android's down, 3 is gone, 6 has seemingly sacrificed himself, 2 is being taken by an alien, and it's 5, the 5 alone on the bridge with Wexler and Rio Ishida watching this alien armada come through. And I just love that dynamic, the dynamic it set up for season 4.
It was great that Rio, at least there was kind of we came full circle there. He's back on board the Raza.
Yeah.
We've learned what was in his head. He's given these secrets to his crew members, his former friends. So at least there was some wrap up there, but obviously you want to keep telling the story.
Yeah, and the fact that also 5 realized, the only, she had to trust him, and she reaches out to him in his quarters, and he's the one that goes and takes 2 down, and then joins them on the bridge. So there's that glimmer of hope, we will say.
Well, you mentioned 5, and that would be, and I've done very poorly in this interview with names, so. Jodelle Ferland. So thank you. I always assumed that she was playing younger than her actual age, and that by this point, at the end of the 3rd season, she's considered pretty much a full-fledged member of the crew. We've seen that she has very unique talents and abilities of her own, and she's certainly been, again, a very active member of the cast on Twitter and in support of the show here at the end. What can you tell us about her that maybe we don't know?
Originally in the comic book, or originally in the script I envisioned, the character was closer to 12, and just for casting purposes, casting someone under 16 is very difficult because you have to provide a tutor, and there's just
hours.
They're not going to school, and I suggested maybe we can. Hire a high school dropout, and they didn't like that idea.
I like that idea.
So we made her 17, and then when I was thinking of who to cast, I had actually worked with Jodelle on 2 separate occasions on Stargate. She played 2 different characters, once when she was very young, and another time when she was still very young, she was actually 12. And she did an episode of Stargate Atlantis called Harmony, where she played a petulant princess, who Shepard and McKay, the main characters on Atlantis, had to deal with and kind of babysit. And I was on set when we were shooting in the forest, actually. And I just remembered she knew her lines down pat. And whenever Joe or David would kind of flub their line and forget their line, she would correct them. And I thought, wow, what a little actress. She reminded me of Dakota Fanning, who, she's a child actress, but I never really saw them as child actors. I saw them as actors because they were so good. Mm-hmm. And so when it came time to audition, she was at the top of my list, and she nailed it. And she's been terrific. And the thing I love about Jodelle is she's a huge geek. She's a fan of anime. She goes to conventions and cosplay. She's a huge Doctor Who fan. We were at San Diego Comic-Con a couple of years ago, and Peter Capaldi and the Doctor Who crew were at the next table. And Jay Firestone, the president of Prodigy Pictures, went over and introduced himself and made the introduction. And Jodelle was thrilled. She's a real sweetheart. Just an incredibly strong actress. She was actually the one cast member who really never came to me with questions about her characters, never came with suggestions about trying this or trying that, but would just, come to set, deliver the lines, and her instincts were always spot on.
I'm going to interrupt myself here for just a second to say that since you mentioned Peter Capaldi, that if there are any Doctor Who fans watching this Dark Matter interview, there is a Peter Capaldi interview on Mr. Media. If you go and check the archives, just search Peter Capaldi, that will come up. So just a little commercial there for the archive. The other major cast member that we have not discussed, there's two, I'm sorry. I almost missed Roger Cross, is 6. I always saw him as kind of the moral center of the show that was essentially about rogues and thieves and murderers. Is that fair?
That is fair. And Roger reminds me a lot about his character. He's very principled. He's very warm. He's very likable. And he was a guy who, 6 was actually one of the last roles we cast. But I remember watching, one of the nice things about being so well prepared and having the story so far in advance is we had 9 scripts by the time we went to camera. So when it came time to audition, I was able to really pick out the best scenes, I thought, for each character. And for him, I picked up, there's a barn scene in episode 106 where he goes and tries to talk 5 back out of it turns out 3's memory and to come back to the Raza, to reality. And he did such a beautiful job on that. And then there's a scene in episode 9 after he kind of snaps at her and she's in the vent and they have the talk and he kind of apologizes to her. And he said, look, and it was a line that I wrote that I basically, I waited for throughout every audition to see how it was delivered. And the line was something like, there'll come a day when you leave this ship, and when that day comes, I'm going to miss you, kid. I'm going to miss you a lot. And I would say no one got it. No one got it, or they got close, but Roger nailed that line. And as soon as he nailed that line, I was like, that's our 6. And, he's been terrific. He's kind of sort of the on-set joker and just a lot of fun. And I kind of call him the hardest working man in Canadian television because he's everything. And, just like the rest of the crew, a pleasure to work with. And a character who's gone through like so many different, like all of them, but really especially him. He goes from, the moral center of the crew turns out he's the undercover cop and he has a crisis of conscience. He comes on board and he spends the entire second season seeking redemption. And it was something that really I didn't want to do, but I had seen in other shows where, a character does something and then they seek redemption and 2 episodes later they're one of the gang. And I didn't want to do that. And so basically I wanted it to be kind of a slow evolution, and he was terrific. And then this year we find out about, what he left behind, that he had a kid and a wife and kid and just, terrific. And that, seemingly final sacrifice at the end of episode 13 really, I think, encapsulates his character and who he was and meant to the crew and to the show in general.
Well, of course, he had this great relationship, his character with Jodelle's character, 5. Yeah. They always come back to that a lot in terms of supporting each other. And it was interesting those times when she was there for him. He was always kind of the father figure to her, but when she was able to be supportive of him, you knew it was things had come quite a ways.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that leaves us with Zoe Palmer as Android. Of course, I could just summarize this in one word: boobs. But what was that was a great example of, just when you least expect it, there was just something funny in the show. It was not always serious. Where did that come from?
Like I said, humor has always been very important, and Zoe is incredibly funny, and she was actually sort of a great example of a character who, in the case of a character who really, I had planned to make her more of a secondary character, but Zoe delivered in such a delightful way that we just kept on adding to her character. And I just kind of would like to push her and see what she could do, and a lot of the Android storyline evolution in the first season came about because our episodes were coming in short, and so I had to bring in extra scenes, and so I would always add scenes. And for instance, in the Wendy the Robot episodes where she feels slighted because everyone's in love with the new android, I wrote that the accent scene because I remember Zoe coming in when she did the audition. I said, great, interesting. The person before you had came in and did it with a British accent. She's like, I can do a British accent. So she did. And I was like, can you do a Jamaican accent? And she did. So when it came time to write that scene, I did them all and the Jamaican accent. And I remember the network writing back, yeah, this scene doesn't work. And I'm like, trust me, the fans are going to love it. Yeah. And they did. And in much the same way, the boobs scene was a scene. The script was written by Paul Mully, but as showrunner, I'm kind of on set and I'm doing all the rewrites, and we introduced this new outfit for Zoe, and she came to set, and it looked like something out of Galaxy Quest. It was so bosomy, booby, if you will. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I talked to Zoe, and she's like, what would help if we actually had a scene that would address this? And so that scene was, I just went upstairs to the office and wrote the scene in 20 minutes and ran it by Zoe. And she's like, can we tweak this and tweak that? And we wrote the scene and we shot it, I think 2-3 days later. And that became, another standout Android scene.
And listen, Star Trek Next Generation fans, if you see Zoe Palmer as Android saying boobs, name me a scene that Data did on Star Trek: The Next Generation that is more memorable than that one moment. I can't think of it. I'm sorry. When he gets emotions, big deal. As Data cries, Zoe Palmer. Come on. Anyway,
yeah, she was terrific. Yeah.
All right, so we got to wrap it up. I know I've kept you here a very long time. So if not a season 4 immediately, or a miniseries, or a film, which Firefly got a film, what's next for you? What do you have something that you're working on now? What do you want to do?
I mean, for Dark Matter, I would like to give the fans some sort of closure, whether it's a comic book, whether I write a couple of scripts that they can read online, or whether it's just, I tell them what I had planned. I think I owe them that at least. But as for me, I look back and actually I've worked 20 years uninterrupted in the business. I went from, animation to live action teen sitcoms to 1-hour action adventure to Stargate for 12 years, to writing a miniseries, to getting a whole bunch of pilots out, to Dark Matter. And now I think I just like to breathe and relax and just read and just take a couple of months to myself. And in the meantime, I've taken meetings. I've been presented, offered some great opportunities, some interesting comic book related stuff. I'm a big comic book guy. So, things in that area interest me. I'm heading down to LA to do the whole, dog and pony show and meet and greet, because I'm finally available. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would like to obviously set up another show. As always, I think whatever the show is, whether it's sci-fi or genre or straight drama, it's going to have that undercurrent of humor and hopefully memorable characters that typify most of the shows I've worked on. So, in answer to that, I don't know what the future holds, but hopefully it'll be something interesting.
Maybe something slightly derivative, like Fark Shatters, and the characters could be un de toi, something like that.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
All right, just throwing it out there.
Sue me if I use that, will you?
No, it's all yours. It's all yours. All right. Well, folks, listen. You can see what you've missed by catching the first 3 seasons. I'm guessing season 3 It will be on Netflix shortly, if not already.
Actually, it is actually available on Netflix.
There you go.
US.
Catch all 3 seasons on Netflix, or you can look for, I know at the moment seasons 1 and 2 are on DVD because I gave them to my nephew for his 50th birthday. And season 3, I'm sure, will follow shortly. Or you can get the graphic novel in great stores everywhere. Or you can order them right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. Oh, so if you're watching this video on MrMedia.com, just below it, you'll see probably the DVD cover for Dark Matter, or maybe the cover of the graphic novel. Click on it now. You can get that within 24 hours in some places. And the price will be good. Where do you want to send people who want to know more about Dark Matter or about you? What is there a website you want them to see, or?
Yeah, you can head over to my blog where, like I said, I've been blogging for over 10 years daily, offering behind-the-scenes pics and videos on Stargate and Dark Matter. And lately I've been posting scripts. I posted the pilot for Dark Matter, first draft pilot of Dark Matter last week. And just the other day I put up the script, the final shooting draft for Isn't That a Paradox, which was the time travel back to 2017 episode that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. But I'll continue talking about Dark Matter, and just Google my name, Joseph Mallozzi, and it'll take you there. Otherwise, you can find me at Reddit, where I will frequent occasionally, and on Twitter, which is kind of exhausting. It's just so hard to keep up with everything on Twitter. But the blog is the best bet.
God, between Dark Matter and politics, the last 3 or 4 weeks, I'm exhausted. You're right.
Yeah, I bet.
It's too much. All right, Joe Mallozzi, it's been great to connect with you via the show, and Twitter is how we set this up. I'll hope for more Dark Matter, but whatever you wind up doing, I wish you a lot of luck. And thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of science fiction TV fans who trace their dissatisfaction with the Sci-Fi Network's lack of long-term support for its shows back at least as far as Eureka, Alphas, and Warehouse 13 in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Hi, this is Rich Scheidner. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to be a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, I'm going to do you a big favor. Instead of billions of dollars for a time machine, you can just spend $24.95 and buy my new book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom. It will save you money and give you thrills. It will take you there. Go to my website, richscheidner.com, go to amazon.com, and buy this book.
We joined on the heels of Farscape being canceled, and then they rebranded to Sci-Fi, and then they did more speculative fiction, and then they shifted to like reality and wrestling, and then basically they made this big announcement that they were going back to their Sci-Fi roots, and then they got rid of us and just greenlit a bunch of paranormal shows. And I have a feeling they're going to be doing probably the talk show and variety route next, because it's the only thing they haven't done. Yeah. And mark my words, they will.